revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. LibertyTalk.fm.
Welcome back to Blue Republican Radio with Robin Koerner. It is, as always, a pleasure to have you with me. And today, I think actually it's fair to say that this show is inspired by the most ridiculous marketing slogan you've ever heard, which is taxes don't have to be taxing. Have you heard of that? It's a lie. It's a huge lie. And I'm going to be talking to a couple of folks who want to do something about that lie. And they are affiliated with a new organization, and it's brand new. It actually launched this last week, called the Tax Revolution Institute. And I'm actually really excited about their approach to what they're doing, so much so that I'm also kind of involved in an advisory capacity. But this is just such a huge topic. I wrote about... I think it was a year ago when I was actually doing my taxes, and we're coming up to tax time again now. I'm certainly kind of buried in spreadsheets and receipts about how I think, just on the face of it, the 70,000 page tax code in this country is utterly regressive in its complexity, and in so being hurts actually the most financially vulnerable the most. And considering that much of that 70,000 pages is written, of course, by the large corporations that can afford the compliance with the complexity, that probably isn't surprising. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to Dan Johnson, Executive Director of Tax Revolution Institute, and also you'll be hearing from later in this show, Adam DeAngeli, the projects director for the same organization. And I know this is about tax, but don't turn off. I think you're going to find this interesting. Dan, welcome to my radio show. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks so much for having me on and for having Adam on.
You bet. This is an important issue. It's so important. Why is it important to you? What is Tax Revolution Institute about, and why is this something that you decided you wanted to spend most of your life doing?
I love how you're planning out my life for me already.
Well, let's put it this way. I'm concerned that it might take a little bit more than a year to take down the 70,000 page tax code and start again. So I think you need to be ready for it. You might have married the tax code here, but let's see.
Probably more than a year, but I certainly hope to live past 60. And I hope that we're done. By 40 years, the revolution has been complete and we've been successful taking on the tax code. But, as you were talking about your experience with the regressive tax code and running your corporation and what you have to do in order to take that on. We've talked a little bit offline about some of your problems, and you've also written an article, if I remember right, in the Huffington Post, was it?
I think actually, I seem to remember that very unusually, they didn't run it. I actually I ran it on Truth in Media, Ben Swan, truthinmedia.com. Okay. It's definitely there. But I think the Huff actually declined to run it, which only happens about like one time in 20. So I don't know what they were thinking.
The Huff may like you better than me because they've declined to run several. But nonetheless, as you were talking about your situation, I've read a lot about your situation and what you had to deal with. I was thinking about, I'm a young guy. I don't deal too much with the tax code. And I was a bit of a contractor throughout, ran my own business, essentially. And I was considered self-employed instead of a contractor, or so the H&R Block lady told me. Hard to tell what the difference between the two is, and there's schedule this and schedule that. So I go into H&R Block because I'm looking at my taxes and going, wait a second, so I have to pay estimated tax on what I think I might make? Whoa, wait a second, what's going on here? So I went to H&R Block, and I sat down with the lady, and she gives me a lot of great advice, and there were two things that came out of that. Number one, the advice wasn't so great, as I found out later, because even she, as a CPA, did not understand that even though I was self-employed, it didn't mean I necessarily needed to file the schedule she was having me file, because it was different than running my own business. I didn't have a corporation. I was self-employed. Even though I explained that to her, she still said, you need to do this, and then I found from somebody else, and no, you didn't need to do that. And so that was number one. But number two, and something that really hit me, we talk about at TRI the broken tax system. And a broken tax, and we use that term broken, as in it's done. Stick a fork in it. You've got to have some massive reform. We call it a tax revolution. And I'm sitting there, and she tells, and I'm asking them what it would cost to do my taxes, and they're rattling off all these ridiculous numbers. And then she said, but we have this program called the Second Look program. And you do your taxes, you bring them in, we look it over, and if you file through the Second Look program, then we'll cover all the taxes, penalties, fees, etc. that come in. And what really struck me about that was the most comforting thing that she told me. was not. It's not that I'm going out and attempting to evade taxes. Some of the taxes, I'm not going to say all of it personally, but some of the taxes that I pay does go toward some good programs that the government runs. But it was that I feared the IRS going after me, even though I did nothing wrong.
Absolutely well said, and what a great place to start this show. Yes, that is it right there, isn't it?
And we have a wide group of people in TRI and all across the political spectrum who really have a lot of different experiences with taxes. But for me, the fact that even if you've done nothing wrong, we have an innocent until guilty justice system. I dealt with justice system, national security, right to trial, things like that in some of my previous work. We have an innocent until guilty system for a reason. We found that it generally works for you to be innocent and then proven guilty instead of Kafkaesque, and you're guilty until you prove yourself innocent. And really, in the tax system, a lot of Americans feel that they are guilty until proven innocent. Even if they do their best to try to comply and they fill out the 1040 EZ or whatever, they do their best to try to comply, and if they don't like the laws, they'll go change them instead of flaunting them. A lot of Americans do that.
Sorry, who will change the laws? Sorry, explain that.
Okay, that if they disagree with the amount of taxes they're paying, that they go through the process and try to change the laws instead of outright flaunting them. A lot of Americans do their best, or flaunting, whatever. Flaunting, yeah. A lot of Americans do their best to comply with the IRS, and I get reports every day of all the stories in the IRS. And without fail, 70% of them are warnings about IRS scams. And I saw an interesting sentence recently that ties this all in. Most scams offer you something. The vast majority, this is an expert on scamming and an expert on scam artists, the vast majority of scams offer you something. One of the only scams that works through fear is the IRS scam. Because even if someone has done nothing wrong, and they know they've done nothing wrong, when they get that letter from the IRS, or they get the phone call supposedly from the IRS, and this has been going on for 4, 5, 6 years, that the IRS has been saying scam, sheriff departments, police departments, scam, they're everywhere. The IRS is not going to call you, which of course is going to change this year because they're bringing back private debt collectors. But nonetheless, we're not even going to go into that. But really, it was the only scam that works by scaring you. And that, if there's any way to describe the broken tax system, I would say that probably does it justice.
So, with a minute and a half left in this first segment, what is TRI, what was it founded for, and what's it going to do about the problem that you've just described?
We are the Institute for the Revolution. Kind of laid out why we need a tax revolution, why we don't just need little reforms and little band-aids. We are the Institute for the Revolution. So we are a nonpartisan institute, and we lay the groundwork necessary for reform. You can't have a revolution that doesn't have a solid base of ideas and a solid platform to work from. So we develop that platform, we research those ideas, and we advocate for people who have been taken advantage of by the tax system, and who have been taken advantage of by people who run the tax system.
What do you mean taken advantage of by the tax system? And I'm asking you that with only like 40 seconds to go. So,
quite the question. Taken advantage of by someone who has the authority to run a certain part of the tax system. So it may be an IRS agent, it may be the Department of Justice, it may be even to a certain extent Congress and congressional actions that they take that affect everyone, but that don't give everyone a fair shake inside the system. So that's what I would say, being taken advantage of by the system. It's very broad, but you give me 40 seconds.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And you finished with even like 15 left. So when we get back, we will talk, the other side of this break, we will talk about your launch. And there was something in particular, that an issue that you brought up at your launch, for your launch, then we will get into that in the second segment. So thanks, Dan.
Okay.
I'm talking to Dan Johnson, the Executive Director of the brand spanking new Tax Revolution Institute. So you launched, I think, on President's Day, press release and all that, but you also launched with a white paper that was, I'm using that in a kind of broad sense, but a kind of a research paper.
Well, there's definitely a lot of color in it because we do like graphic design, but yes.
Right, yes, an off-white paper. What was it about? Tell us about this issue, because, it's obviously an issue I know about now because I was involved in this. Very interesting one indeed. I record this show under the Bill of Rights, both metaphorically, obviously, because I'm here in America, but also literally, I'm looking at it on my wall. And the issue that you raised at your launch as an organization is kind of a strange one, I think, intuitively. It's about the potential for the IRS to impinge upon free speech in quite a profound way. So let's talk a little bit about that.
So the first thing I want to do is finish answering one of your previous questions, which was kind of who are we? Who is TRI?
Fair enough,
I talked a little bit of why we need a tax revolution, but I really want to talk a little bit about who TRI is. And really, the best way to describe us is we are equal parts tax watchdog, research institute, and taxpayer advocate. So those are kind of the three parts of TRI melded together. But the way we've set it up is we have two projects. We have Tax Watch, which Adam is the director of, and then we have Tax Reform, which we have economists working in to develop different tax reform plans, transition plans, et cetera. So on the Tax Watch side, the mission is transparency, accountability, and integrity. That's what we want to bring to the U.S. tax system. FOIA requests,
transparency, accountability, and integrity. How about that?
Flows right off the tongue, doesn't it?
In the tax code. There you go. Yeah, all right. Yeah.
Great, crazy place to have it. But the second part on the reform side is developing nonpartisan, simple, innovative tax reform solutions. And one of the things that's going to set us apart is we're actually going to develop this crazy thing called a transition plan.
Oh, I like the sound of this.
So you're not going to go from just this tax system to the next one, and then all of a sudden you're hanging off a cliff and you have no idea where all your money just went because you were planning for this tax system. But there's actually going to be a step-by-step transition plan into whatever system or whatever reform plan that our research team kind of develops and talks to different people about and works to create. That there'll actually be a transition plan into that.
And this is obviously really politically important, right? Because there are a lot of tax reform organizations out there that come up with, some pretty good plans. There are a lot of them. And has anything changed? No. They just kind of completely fail politically, time and time again. So actually, one of the reasons why I was interested in working with TRI is that I think you have this sense that the communication of the plan is important and the politics, you got to keep the politics in mind. And, whenever you come into a big systemic political change, there are groups who vote, who get hurt, right? Even if they kind of need to get hurt to deal with a problem, a long-term kind of problem that needs to be resolved, that it's right that victims of the transition are at least considered in the transition. And I think, a lot of these tax reform organizations, they kind of paint the destination tax code they would like or tax system they would like. And it really kind of comes out of their own theory or their own political view. But it's not pragmatic because they're omitting all the things we're talking about here with respect to the transition. So I think this is really important. I'm really glad that you're sensitive to that. So anyway, there's my 2 cents worth. Carry straight on.
No, it's important to develop transition plans that basically one of our principles of tax reform is first, do no harm. Right. So with tax reform, you want to, and I call it tax reform, I need to start calling it tax revolution, because tax reform has been essentially co-opted. It's used by all these organizations to mean nothing, to mean that we are going to carve out a little piece for ourselves and for our friends, and then we're going to call it a day. So really developing the transition plans and making sure that we're not harming people as we're introducing really badly needed tax reform, that we're harming the least people we possibly can. And even those who end up, you're never going to develop a perfect plan, but even those who end up on the wrong side of the fence, so to speak, will be considered, and we'll do our best to mitigate that harm. And that's something a lot of reform groups aren't doing. We badly need tax reform. Things are going to change, and change leaves some people behind and brings some people forward. But most groups aren't trying to take care of the people that the change is inevitably going to leave behind. And that's what we're going to do at TRI. But first, we're focused right now on the tax watchdog side, because honestly, there needs to be a lot more accountability and a lot more transparency in the tax system. Really, a lot more people need to know about it. Let me throw out this figure. The Joint Committee on Taxation, which controls our tax code, essentially. They are the arbiter of the tax code. They are a committee between the Senate of the United States and the House of the United States. They get together and they swap chairmanship. So one year it's the House, next year it's the Senate. But they are the finance committees getting together, and they're the people who decide taxation. They have, last I checked...
Hold on, when you say decide taxation, obviously it's law, it's legislation, it's voted on in Congress. So what do you mean decide taxation?
So in order to introduce a bill or push a bill through Congress, you have to write the language, right? They write the language, and you're not going to get a bill through Congress without Joint Committee on Taxation's approval. They have that much influence, right, over Congress. So they have... because this is how much Americans are paying attention to the tax system, to the real people who actually write the law. They have 27 likes on Facebook. 27. Their website looks like it's straight out of 1990. And they haven't updated anything. They very rarely post on Twitter. I mean, it is amazing how little people pay attention to this. So bringing the very needed transparency, accountability, integrity really at the forefront of what we're doing. And honestly, that's what the Free Speech Project is about, that we're focused on. And I'll let Adam get a lot more into that.
Okay, well, let's move over then to Adam. Adam, we've got 2.5 minutes left in this segment, but then we got the long 17 minutes so you can go to town. So in the last 2.5 minutes of the second segment, please, let's set up what this issue is that TRI has taken on for its launch.
Right, so the Tax Watch project is the first large-scale project that TRI is pursuing, and the biggest effort that we're doing to lead with is to spotlight an IRS effort going on. Well, it's actually kind of been suspended right now, but it's going to be ongoing. What they're doing is they're trying to redefine what political activity means and what electioneering means, such that all nonprofit organizations in the United States, and that includes advocacy groups, educational institutions, labor unions, chambers of commerce, the things that they are normally now permitted by law to do, they would no longer be able to do. Most of all, they would not be able to even name any candidate for office, so any office holder then if they're running for re-election, and even their parties during the election period when people actually talk about the political issues. So what the effect this would actually have on these organizations is to say you either can no longer do the things that you do, namely educating people and supporting policies, or lose your nonprofit status, which for a number of these companies is actually going to literally put them out of business, because their business model is not set up to be a for-profit company, or at the very least force them to scale back dramatically. So it would be a very powerful, chilling effect on political discourse in this country. And unfortunately, the only group that can really stop them from doing this is Congress.
Now, hold on. When you say, sorry, Adam, when you say stop them from doing this, in this case, the them is the IRS that is seeking to make its own rule, right?
Right. The IRS is a federal agency, and all federal agencies have a process where they can create new federal regulations within the law. If the law is unclear, they can write something that would interpret it. This, however, is not actually interpreting the law. This is actually settled law. It's been settled by the Supreme Court multiple times. It's law that's been put into place by Congress. But what the IRS is doing is claiming that, well, we can simply clarify what candidate-related political activity means, and we'll sweep in anything that even names anybody that's running for office. So what this would impose upon every nonprofit in the country is that they now would actually have to monitor every single election in the country and determine if anybody they have mentioned anywhere on their website might be running for office, and if so, scrub that. Otherwise, they risk losing their nonprofit status.
Okay, Adam, you know what? Let's stop right there because we're going into the break. We'll come back and explore this in a minute.
Trust. For nearly 4 decades, that is the reputation Roberts & Roberts Brokerage has forged with their customers. Now, with their full e-commerce website, rrbi.co, it's easier than ever to buy or sell precious metals via Bitcoin or major credit card. Visit them online at rrbi.co or call 800-874-9760 to speak with an experienced professional today. Roberts & Roberts, when you're serious about precious metals.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic process.
The War State by Michael Swanson is a must-read for anyone interested in the critical 20 years after World War II, when the United States morphed from a constitutional republic to a global imperial superpower. Get The War State by Michael Swanson from Amazon.com today.
This is Blue Republican Radio with Robin Koerner, and I am talking to Dan Johnson and Adam D'Angeli of the Tax Revolution Institute. And when we went into the break there, Adam, you were explaining that the IRS is proposing to make a rule that will basically redefine electioneering, i.e., speech which isn't completely free, right, which is regulated. And so a lot of basic free speech protections would no longer apply to organizations and individuals within organizations if those organizations are to be able to maintain their tax-exempt status. Have I got that right?
Right. Basically, the distinction is this. If I am to say, vote for John Smith for Congress, that's considered electioneering. That is a statement of express advocacy. And that's what the Supreme Court has defined electioneering to mean, is where there is no question what I've just done. I've said, vote for so-and-so or vote against so-and-so. So I've expressly stated I'm seeking to change the outcome of the election. Mm-hmm. But now what if I was to say, Senator Smith voted for a terrible bill that Congress passed last month? Now, is that electioneering, or is that just stating a fact? And that's the distinction. That's considered issue discussion, because if I'm an organization and I have a policy that I'm trying to promote, part of that is actually engaging the public and saying, "Hey, your politician voted for this," and that indirectly promotes the legislation, because therefore now people are talking about the issue. Now the politician feels that this is an issue in the community. So now if I can no longer say that, that's taking. It makes it so that there can be no connection between the issue and the people who decide the issue, the lawmakers, during the time when it matters most, when people are thinking about these issues, when they're talking about these issues, when the politicians care the most about what the constituents are talking about.
Yes.
So this will affect every organization in the country if they're a nonprofit.
And just
go ahead.
So I was going to say, and just to be clear, Adam, even if a nonprofit website didn't say, Fred Smith voted for this terrible bill, but simply said Fred Smith voted for this bill, that would be prohibited under this rule, wouldn't it?
Amazingly, as the IRS has proposed it, it doesn't even have to say John Smith voted for this bill. It can say John Smith is a congressman from Michigan. It actually says
absurd, right?
Any reference to a candidate or to a party during election time is electioneering. It is that It is staggeringly broad.
So this seems almost too incredible to believe. So it begs this question. Why would the IRS want to do that? How have we come to this?
According to the IRS, it's simply going to make lives easier for everybody. And, of course, that is not true for the nonprofit community because now they are facing significant legal exposure on a constant basis if this would be enacted. However, it's true it would make things easier for the IRS. And the IRS, in fact, is kind of feeling the burn from this issue because a couple of years ago there was this terrible scandal where the IRS was discriminating against organizations applying for nonprofit status based upon their ideology, based upon certain terms that they might use that was subjecting them to scrutiny. The IRS admitted wrongdoing. There were resignations from the very top, the IRS commissioner, to like 5 levels down to the director of the exempt organizations. So it was very bad for the IRS. It was a big shakeup. And the outcome of this was they produced a report analyzing what went wrong, and they said there was misjudgment in all of this. But then to prevent this from happening again, it would be nice if we had clearer guidelines. Now, it's true, yes, if suddenly everything we're doing is now completely forbidden, and there's no question about it, you have these black line rules, yes, it would certainly be clearer for everybody, but there's no lack of clarity now for these nonprofit organizations, what they can and can't do. As I described, the law says that express electioneering is what you can't do. Everything else is protected speech, and that's how we want it to be in our country, that we have the right to this issue discussion.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth, mentioning that the restriction of the free speech of such nonprofit organizations, that's not a minor thing. I mean, it's quite a pervasive and extensive thing, right? Because if you're a social welfare organization, obviously a lot of social welfare is public policy. You need to be talking about policy. And, to conduct any kind of effective social welfare change or advocacy, you need to be formed. You need to be incorporated in something, in like a 501c4 or whatever it might be. There's different 501c organizations, but one of those. So this is a major limitation on free speech, is what I'm getting at. It's not a minor one that's only going to affect a few obscure organizations, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll give you a great example. One of the cases to the Supreme Court that really determined why we have these freedoms is the case of NAACP v. Patterson. And that was the case where the state of Alabama was trying to forcibly evict the National Association for Colored People out of the state. This was during the Civil Rights era. And one of the things that the state demanded was that the organization turn over their membership lists. Yeah. And, of course, during the Civil Rights era, that would be very chilling to the organization, that their members could be subject to intimidation. And, of course, people would be more hesitant to join if they knew their list might be going to the state. So the Supreme Court held that, yes, it's so important, this connection between free speech and free assembly, that organizations that advocate for policy change should have the right to their privacy. And that's part of the 14th Amendment. That was what this case held. The IRS would overturn all of this because what they're now saying is that the stuff that these groups do, this social welfare, and I certainly argue, I think you're exactly right. Public policy is social welfare. It's good that we have these discussions, that the public is engaged in this. And it's not just special interests dictating policy. And this would all be done away with simply for the sake of expedience for the IRS. And the only casualty would be, civil discourse in this country. It's a terrible thing.
Yeah, it's shocking. So, how dangerous a situation are we in? This report, I believe, Adam, is something that the TRI has put out in time for action to be taken, right? So that we can head this off by lawmaking in Congress. Is that right?
Well, by the rulemaking IRS, actually. What's happened up to
what I mean is to prevent the IRS from making this rule, action needs to be taken in the legislature. Is that right?
Right. What Congress can do is they can preemptively block the rule by defining what political speech means, and that is to codify what the Supreme Court has said, which is that candidate-related political activity means electioneering, which means express advocacy. It means saying those magic words, vote for or cast your ballot for, that kind of thing. By doing that, they can prevent the IRS from interpreting what they think is, or what they say is, undecided, unsettled law. Yep. And so by doing that, then the IRS wouldn't be able to make the rule. However, if Congress doesn't act, right now, Congress has actually temporarily blocked the IRS from implementing the rule until the end of this coming September. There was a provision put into the last year's budget that said that they could no longer pursue the rule. But the IRS, they have already done the public comment period. They are under no obligation to follow the recommendations of the public, which was overwhelmingly opposed to the rule, as you might expect. And there is no particular timeline that they have to follow at this point any further. So there's nothing stopping them from this October implementing this rule and it going into effect in 30 days, unless this is stopped. So time is definitely of the essence here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dan, let's go back to you and step a bit back and more just consider like this nightmare that is the tax system more generally. What does TRI do next? I mean, what is going to be different about TRI's approach that's going to enable, let's say, your economists to come up with an actionable reformation of the tax system in a way that no other organization has? There are many kids on the block. What kind of reception have you been getting?
Well, first of all, we have some of the only kids on the block, so to speak, because we actually have the attention of the millennial generation. We actually have the attention of the younger people. And you can look at our team and see some of the younger people we've got on board, including myself. So that's number one, that you're not cutting out an entire section of the population that, oh, well, they're not old enough to care or know anything about it, et cetera.
So are you actually marketing your informational materials to that demographic? Is that part of the plan?
I think that some of that would be part of the plan, but honestly, people don't give, I'll call them my demographic, as much credit as they need to. I mean, we don't, marketing, they're going to be included in the marketing, obviously, but it's not like you need to do what I think it was Health and Human Services did when they created ads for the Affordable Care Act with a bunch of hip hop dancers spinning around and saying things like, we're so hip, look at this. That was a disaster. No. You really don't need to market necessarily to the youth. You market to the people, and you actually talk about things that affect the young people of this country, which most tax reform organizations don't do. And there's a lot of very well-intentioned people in the tax sphere. There really is. But a couple of things change this. Number one, the time is right. When you look at tax reform, it is on the list of topics that candidates are talking about. It is on the list of topics the American people want to know about and want to get engaged with. So number one, the time is right. Number two, a lot of these, again, very good-hearted, very well-intentioned people, they set up these think tanks and then they get, I'll call it kind of DC syndrome. So they just get all of these letters after everybody's name. So here's the PhD in economics from 18 universities, and here's this person, and here's that person. And they kind of insulate themselves in a little bubble where they're not getting input from the average Joe. They're talking so far over the average Joe's head that they're talking to each other in the boardrooms. And that's why, look at the major tax reform plans, the fair tax and the flat tax. Have they gone anywhere? Flat tax was introduced in 1987 by Alban Rabushka. Has it gone anywhere in the United States? Fair tax has been introduced since 1995. Has it gone anywhere in the United States? And I would say the answer is a very clear no. And that's 21 years for the fair tax, and go even further for the flat tax. So really, the citizen was never brought to the table.
Okay.
The average taxpayer was never brought to the table. The people who are going to be most affected by these changes were never brought to the table. And that's really what we're doing with TRI, is we're bringing them to the table. We're reaching out to them in town halls. We're going to talk to these taxpayers about what reforms do you need to see, do you want to see, and then going to the economists and saying, look, does this work? Does this work economically? Does this make sense? So you have the best of both worlds instead of this, like I said, kind of the DC syndrome of we all have a bunch of letters on our names, therefore we'll be able to come up with a code that best fits the American people, whether they like it or not.
So are you saying that you're almost going to try and be led by the will of we the people, rather than come up with another plan, vaguely push it out and nothing really happens? That's what you're saying. You're doing this kind of almost the other way around.
Yeah, I would say that's absolutely the case. I forget nodding my head. We're on the radio. Yeah. Nodding my head doesn't really get out there, right? So, no, that I think that's absolutely the case, that we're going to be led a lot by the people, and then we're going to bring the experts in. They're going to have a say in this. So you have, like I said, the best of both worlds. If you're going to have a serious adult conversation about tax reform and about what's necessary, you have to bring both sides in, and there's a lot of groups that just focus on one side.
So what's the lowest hanging fruit in, dealing with the tax system? I mean, obviously, as I said at the top of the show, the complexity is regressive. And so I think any serious tax reform or revolution obviously needs to be massively about simplicity. But given, as you say, that there are always those that want to... Nobody's prepared to lose what they already have, whether they have it fairly or unfairly. So given that, where do you think, I mean, it might be too early for you guys to say, I don't know, but where do you think the lowest hanging fruit's going to be?
Well, when we started this radio broadcast, I talked about how we're the Institute for the Tax Revolution, developing the ideas and the platform that the revolution stands on. We're approximately 3 days and 17 hours, almost 18 hours old Eastern time. And I really couldn't give you an answer as to where the lowest hanging fruit is. We have to really focus on our principle of being right rather than first. So it may take us 6 months to come out with, hey, here's something we need to focus on. It's already taken us 36 months to come out with what Adam talked about, right? So it may take us 6 months to come out with, here's something we need to focus on in the reform. Here's something we need to focus on in the system. But when we do it, we're going to do it right. We're going to have the sources cited. We're going to have all the information we need so that we can empower the American public to have a say in their tax system. So I really can't tell you, where's the lowest hanging fruit, because we really don't know yet, and it would be foolish to rush in like certain candidates for high office have done so recently.
Indeed. Now, in the last couple of minutes of this segment then, I mean, you mentioned DC. What about negotiating that? I mean, how do you deal in DC?
You don't play their game.
Okay.
You see, one of my other issues that I was involved in, we killed an amendment in the Senate that was actually going to make our issue worse. And if people can look me up, they can see my work with the NDAA prior to this tax organization.
The National Defense Authorization Act that you were advocating against before you got into the tax revolution stuff. Yeah. Right,
exactly. That was what got me out of my chair as a college student.
Okay.
Who, I was going to wait till after college, right? So, have my 4-year degree in paper and letters and all that stuff, right? So, really, when it comes down to DC, most people don't understand that at the end of the day, a critical mass of people will change the mind of any politician because their job relies on the opinion of the public. Their job relies on their reputation. And if you can show the public that their reputation is not what it seems, and you can show the public that whoever it is, that their reputation doesn't hold up when it's in the limelight, that they're doing things the public doesn't know about, that's how you bring a critical mass of people in on an issue. I mean, I speak from experience in local legislatures and state legislatures and in D.C., that the way you get into D.C. is you walk in understanding you are the boss, they are the employee, and you bring a bunch of people with you. You do that, and you don't play their game, and you don't play the bribery and the galas and all of the things that go on in DC culture. You don't play that game. You walk in, the citizens have arrived, the people have arrived, and it's time to listen to us. You are the employee, we are the boss. That's how you work in DC.
What a nice way to end the long segment. So as we finish out this show here, gentlemen, let me turn to you, Adam. I think the issue that you talked about, it's pretty damn important. I mean, we're talking about the First Amendment, right? If listeners to this show are concerned about it, what should they do? Where should they go?
Well, the first thing they should do is visit our website, taxrevolution.us, and learn more about the issue. We have a nice document that kind of lays it all out in detail and a few shorter ones as well. People can go online and they can get the facts and understand the issue themselves and then share that information, especially with any organizations you might be a part of or might know people who are associated with, and let them know that they need to be contacting their congressman and demanding that they protect their right to free speech. Because if this goes away, it is going to have a tremendously chilling effect on political discourse in this country. And the only people who are going to be the better off for it are going to be the politicians who no longer have to worry about people telling the voters how they're voting on things.
Yeah, and I want to just re-emphasize that point. I think that's a really important point, Adam. The politicians have a vested interest in letting the IRS get away with this because it will stop the lights being shone on the decisions they make and the votes that they take. And that's good for a lot of politicians a lot of the time. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Adam. So back to you, Dan. In the last minute of the show, would you want to wrap up?
Well, I'd like to wrap up. That'd be nice. First of all, thank you for having us on the show. I mean, the importance of the Blue Republican movement, the connecting both sides, the nonpartisanship of what you're doing really is an important aspect. And you said you're very involved to a certain extent with us. And that's one of the reasons that I'm happy you're involved is because of that nonpartisan aspect. And really what I would ask people who are listening to the show is, isn't it time for a tax revolution? Isn't it time for the tax system to face a critical mass of citizens who actually care about the issue? We think it's time. We think it's long past time for citizens to stand up, for people in this country to stand up and take action. And we are, like I said, equal parts tax watchdog, research institute, and taxpayer advocate. And we're going to be there to do our best to provide people the resources and information education in order to build the groundwork for that revolution. So if people want to get engaged with us, if they want to join us, they can go to taxrevolution.us. That's taxrevolution.us.
Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. LibertyTalk.fm.